Welcome, my children, to the firelight. Sit close, for the wind outside carries whispers of a time when the world was split in two. In the village of Oru, nestled beneath the shadows of a towering royal palace, lived a girl named Elara. She was a child of grace, but her life was a storm of chores and sharp words. Her mother was long gone, and her father's heart had grown silent under the weight of his new wife's tongue. One morning, the village gathered for the festival of new blooms. It was a day of color and music, a day where every maiden wore her finest jewels. Elara's stepmother, a woman with a heart like a cold hearth, stood before the crowd. With a mocking smile, she pulled out a tangled, tarnished string. At the end hung a cracked stone, split down the middle. "Since you are so fond of old things, Elara, take this," the stepmother sneered, loud enough for the neighbors to hear. "It is broken and useless, just like the hope you carry." The villagers erupted in cruel laughter, their voices stinging like wasps. Elara took the necklace, her head bowed in deep shame. As she turned away, a single tear fell, landing squarely on the jagged crack of the stone. The tear did not roll off. Instead, it sank into the stone like water into parched earth. For a brief second, a golden light flickered deep within the crack, so bright it made Elara blink, but it vanished before anyone else could see. She hurried home, the sound of the village's laughter still ringing in her ears. While the others danced and feasted on roasted meats, Elara was sent to the back of the compound to scrub the massive iron cooking pots. Her hands were raw and her back ached, but her mind was elsewhere. The broken necklace, tucked beneath her tunic, felt strangely heavy. It wasn't the weight of stone, but the weight of a living thing. As she worked, the metal grew warm against her skin, glowing with a gentle heat that eased the soreness in her chest. Night fell, covering Oru in a thick blanket of silence. Elara lay on her thin mat, unable to sleep. She pulled the necklace out, watching it in the moonlight. Suddenly, a sound filled the room, a faint rhythmic hum like the buzzing of a distant hive. A whisper, soft as a falling leaf, seemed to drift from the stone, calling a name she almost recognized. The next morning, Elara took the necklace to the light of the window. Upon closer inspection, she saw something she had missed before. Inside the jagged crack, tiny ancient symbols were carved into the silver casing. They were not the letters of their kingdom, but swirling patterns that looked like dancing flames. Curious and afraid, she went to the village marketplace to find Elder Kale, the man who remembered the stories everyone else had forgotten. When she showed him the broken stone, the color drained from his face. His hands shook as he pushed the necklace back toward her. "Where did you get this, child?" he hissed, his eyes darting around to see if anyone was watching. "My stepmother gave it to me," she replied, confused by his terror. Kale grabbed her arm, his voice a ragged whisper. "This is a mark of the unseen. It is a key to a house that was burned down before the first king was crowned. Hide it, Elara. If the palace sees this symbol, they will not just take the necklace, they will take your soul." He turned and fled into his hut, leaving Elara standing in the dust, her heart pounding against her ribs. Fear followed Elara like a shadow, but curiosity was a stronger master. That evening, she walked the quiet forest path to fetch dry wood. The necklace began to pulse in rhythm with her heartbeat. The humming grew louder, vibrating through her very bones. As she passed an ancient twin-trunked baobab tree, the air in front of her began to shimmer like heat rising from a summer road. The necklace flared with a sudden, blinding brilliance. Before her eyes, the space between the trees folded back like a curtain, revealing a doorway made of pure, translucent light. It was an entrance to a place that shouldn't exist. Terrified yet drawn by an invisible force, Elara took a step forward. Her foot crossed the threshold, and the sounds of the forest vanished. She stood in a world that mirrored Oru, but everything was different. The grass was a deep, shimmering blue, and the trees reached toward a sky filled with two moons. The palace in the distance was not made of stone, but of woven light and silver mist. It was silent, ancient, and breathtaking. She realized then that she was no longer in the world of men. Elara walked through the tall blue grass, her breath coming in short gasps. Everything felt familiar, like a half-remembered dream from her infancy. Suddenly, a movement caught her eye. Standing near a pool of silver water was a man. He was tall, dressed in robes that shifted colors like a dragonfly's wing. He did not look like the guards at the royal court. His eyes held the wisdom of 1,000 years. He did not move to attack her. Instead, he bowed his head deeply. "So," he said, his voice like the chime of a silver bell, "the one who was promised has finally returned. The daughter of the threshold has found her key." Elara stepped back, her hands trembling. "I am just a servant girl," she whispered. "I don't belong here." The stranger smiled sadly. "You were never a servant, Elara. You were a secret kept in the dark to protect the light." Before she could ask what he meant, he stepped into the mist and vanished. A cold wind blew, and Elara felt the doorway behind her beginning to close. She scrambled back through the light, falling onto the dirt of the forest path just as the shimmering portal disappeared.
When Elara returned home, her basket of wood was half empty and her eyes were wide with wonder. Her stepmother was waiting at the gate, her arms crossed and her face twisted in a scowl. "Where have you been, you lazy girl? The fires are low and the sun is down," she barked. But as Elara walked past, the stepmother stopped. She sniffed the air, her eyes narrowing. Elara smelled of crushed lilies and ozone, scents that didn't belong to the dusty village of Oru. "What is that?" the stepmother demanded, reaching out to grab Elara's collar. Her eyes fell on the necklace. The broken stone was no longer dull. It looked polished, and the cracks seemed to be glowing with a faint, inner embers. "Give that back to me," the stepmother shrieked, her voice cracking with a sudden, sharp fear. She reached for the string, but as her fingers touched the metal, a spark of blue electricity jumped from the necklace. The woman screamed, drawing her hand back as if burned. The necklace tightened slightly around Elara's neck, refusing to be moved. For the first time, Elara saw a flicker of true, raw terror in her stepmother's eyes.
News of the burning necklace spread through the village like fire through dry grass. The next morning, the stepmother forced Elara to go to the market, hoping to shaming her again by claiming Elara had stolen a family heirloom. As they stood near the center of the square, a heavy wooden scaffolding used by the masons began to groan. A massive beam snapped, tilting directly over a group of playing children. The crowd screamed, but Elara felt a surge of energy rush from her chest to the stone. She didn't think, she simply threw her hand upward. A wave of golden light erupted from the broken necklace, forming a shimmering shield in the air. The heavy timber hit the light and bounced back, landing harmlessly in the dust. The market went deathly silent. The children ran to their mothers, and all eyes turned to the girl in the ragged tunic. The necklace was glowing so brightly it illuminated her face like a goddess. "It is mine," the stepmother cried out, trying to regain control. "It is a cursed thing she took from my jewel box." But the villagers didn't laugh this time. They backed away, whispering the word witch and chosen in equal measure.
The peace of the village was shattered. That afternoon, Elder Kale found Elara hiding in the shadows of the granary. His face was grimmer than before. "The door has tasted your blood and your tears, Elara," he said. "It opens only for the bloodline of the keepers. You have awakened a sleeping giant." Elara clutched the stone. "I just wanted to save the children," she cried. Kale shook his head. "The palace has ears everywhere. The king's sorcerers have felt the ripple you created. They have spent generations trying to find that doorway, for they believe it holds the gold of the old gods. Now, they know the key is here, in the hands of a girl they once stepped over." Even as he spoke, the sound of galloping hooves thundered in the distance. A cloud of red dust rose from the palace road. 12 royal guards, clad in crimson armor and carrying spears of black iron, rode into the village square. Their leader, a man with a scar across his bridge of his nose, held up a parchment. "By order of the High Court," he bellowed. Bring us the girl with the broken stone. The king commands her presence at the great throne.
The journey to the palace was a blur of dust and clanking armor. Elara was not placed in a carriage but was forced to walk between two horses, her hands bound by silk ropes that hummed with their own magic. As she passed through the golden gates of the royal court, she felt a wave of coldness wash over her. The palace was a place of sharp angles and hard stone, built to intimidate. She was led into the great hall, where the king sat upon a throne carved from a single block of obsidian. Beside him stood the queen and a row of nobles dressed in silks that cost more than her entire village. They looked at her with disgust. "This is the one?" the king asked, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. A servant girl with dirt beneath her fingernails. A noblewoman laughed behind her hand. "She looks more like a beggar than a mage." But as Elara stepped onto the dais, the necklace began to vibrate violently. A low, thunderous sound rumbled beneath the floorboards. The obsidian throne, ancient and immovable, suddenly cracked from base to crown. The mockery died instantly, replaced by a suffocating, heavy silence.
"She carries forbidden fire," a young nobleman named Lord Vane shouted, pointing a trembling finger. He was the king's favorite, known for his ambition and his hatred of the common folk. "She has brought a curse into the heart of the kingdom to destroy the throne." The king leaned forward, his eyes fixed on the necklace. "Tell us, girl, where did a peasant get such a relic?" Elara looked up, her voice steady despite her fear. "My stepmother gave it to me to mock me, Your Majesty. I did not ask for its power." The palace historian, an ancient man with a beard that touched the floor, crept forward. He adjusted his spectacles and peered at the symbols on the silver casing. He gasped, falling to his knees. "The seal of the vanished guardian," he whispered. "Your Majesty, this is no curse. It is the long-lost heart of the kingdom's true foundation. This girl is not a witch. She is a descendant of the line we thought we had extinguished 100 years ago." The nobles began to argue, their voices rising in a storm of panic and greed. They didn't see Elara as a person, they saw her as a weapon to be claimed.
The historian, Master Oren, led Elara to the secret archives beneath the palace. He spoke of a time when the kingdom was guarded by the unseen, a race of beings who lived in the world between worlds. They had left behind a guardian to maintain the balance, but the guardian had been betrayed by the first king, who wanted all the power for himself. The guardian vanished, leaving behind a single relic, a necklace that could bridge the two realms. The legend says the guardian's blood will one day return to open the unseen door and judge the heart of the land, Oren explained, his voice hushed. Elara touched the cracked stone. "Am I the judge?" she asked softly. Oren looked at her with pity. "The stone is broken because the promise was broken, Elara. Only someone who understands sacrifice can make it whole again." As she listened, the air in the archives grew thin. The necklace began to pull her, not toward the stairs, but toward the corner of the room. She saw a faint outline of a door appearing on the stone wall. The palace was no longer her prison. It was a map, and the necklace was her compass. She realized her destiny was tied to a world older than the crown.
That night, Elara did not wait for the guards to sleep. She touched the necklace and whispered the word she had heard in her dream. The air shimmered, and she stepped through the invisible door, leaving her palace cell behind. She arrived in the unseen realm, but this time, the blue grass was stained with shadows. The silver pool was dark, and the sky was a bruised purple. As she walked, visions began to flicker in the air like reflections on a bubble. She saw a young woman, her stepmother, standing in this very spot years ago. The woman was beautiful then, but her face was twisted with grief. She was holding a bundle in her arms, a baby. Beside her was a man with eyes like Elara's. "Hide her in the world of men," the man whispered, handing the woman the silver necklace. "The king's hunters are coming. If they find her here, they will kill her to stop the prophecy." Elara watched as her stepmother, crying, took the necklace and the child, stepping through a portal back to Oru. The vision shifted, showing the stepmother growing bitter and cold, her fear turning into a wall of cruelty to keep Elara hidden and invisible.
Elara returned to the physical world, her heart heavy with the truth. She was not a servant. She was the child of the unseen, hidden for her own safety. She managed to escape the palace and return to her village, finding her stepmother in their small hut. The woman was frantic, throwing old papers into a small fire. "Where have you been?" the stepmother screamed, but her voice lacked its usual bite. It was the sound of a cornered animal. "I saw you," Elara said quietly. "I saw you in the unseen world. You didn't hate me. You were afraid for me." The stepmother froze, a half-burned scroll in her hand. Her face crumpled, and for the first time she looked her age. "They killed your father because he wouldn't tell them where the key was," she whispered, her eyes red with unshed tears. "I thought if I made you small, if I made you invisible, if I gave you a broken necklace that looked like trash, they would never look at you. I became a monster to save your life, Elara. But the stone, it remembered who you were even when I tried to forget." She reached out, her hand trembling, but she did not touch the girl.
The news of Elara's escape and her return to the village turned Oru into a place of pilgrimage. Villagers who had once laughed at her now brought gifts of bread and honey. They knelt when she walked by, begging for her to touch their sick children or bless their crops. Small miracles began to happen. Withered trees bloomed in an hour, and dry wells filled with sweet water. But with fame came a different kind of shadow. One evening, a man dressed as a humble traveler approached her. "I have heard of your kindness, Great One," he said, bowing low. As Elara reached out to help him up, he lunged forward, his hand clawing at the necklace. "The king will pay a fortune for this," he hissed. But the stone flared with an angry, red light, throwing the man backward into the dirt. Elara realized that she was no longer safe in her home. Power had a scent, and it was attracting the greedy and the desperate. The people's worship was just another kind of cage. She looked toward the palace, which glowed like a coal on the horizon. The king would not stop until the door was his, or until she was dead.
The betrayal came from a person Elara never expected. Elder Kale, the man who had warned her, led the royal guards to her hiding spot by the river. "Forgive me, Elara," he whispered, his eyes downcast. "The king promised to spare the village if I gave you up. I cannot let everyone suffer for one girl." The guards seized her, and this time, they used chains of cold iron that dampened the necklace's glow. She was dragged back to the palace, her spirit broken. They threw her into a pit beneath the throne room, a dark place where the walls wept with dampness. As she sat in the dark, sobbing, a light appeared in the corner of the cell. The mysterious stranger from the unseen world stepped out of the shadows. "You look for help from those who fear you," he said gently. "But the strength you need is not in their hands." He touched the iron chains, and they fell away like dead leaves. "You stand at a crossroads, daughter. You can use this stone to burn the palace to ashes and take your revenge, or you can use it to heal the rift between the worlds. The door is weakening. You must choose."
"Why should I save a kingdom that wants to chain me?" Elara asked, her voice raw with anger. The stranger leaned against the damp wall. "Because a guardian does not protect the king. A guardian protects the life of the land. If you choose revenge, the necklace will stay broken and the doorway will shatter, destroying both worlds in the process. Hate is a fire that leaves nothing but cinders." Elara looked at the cracked stone. It pulsed with a dull, thumping heat. She could feel the power within it, the power to tear the palace apart, to make Lord Vane and the king crawl in the dust. The temptation was a sweet, heavy weight in her mind. But then she thought of the children at the market, the blue grass of the unseen realm, and her father's silent sacrifice. The doorway was a bridge, not a wall. If she destroyed her enemies, she would also destroy the beauty she had seen. "The time is coming," the stranger warned. "The great alignment is tomorrow. When the sun hits the palace spire, the door will open one last time. If it is not stabilized by a heart of mercy, it will explode."
The next day, the king ordered a public trial in the great courtyard. Thousands of people gathered to watch the Witch of Oru face judgment. Elara was brought out, her face pale but her eyes clear. Lord Vane stood as the prosecutor. She has admitted to entering forbidden realms. She has stolen the blood right of the king, he bellowed. The stepmother was dragged forward, forced to testify against Elara. Tell them, Vane commanded. Tell them she is a thief. The stepmother looked at Elara, then at the king. Her voice was strong. She is no thief. She is the truth you tried to bury. The king roared in anger, ordering the guards to strike the woman. But as the whip was raised, Elara stepped forward. The necklace erupted in a pillar of light that reached the clouds. You ask for proof of my truth. Elara's voice rang out, amplified by the power of the stone. The truth is not in my words, but in your memories. The light expanded, washing over the entire courtyard. It was not a physical blow, but an emotional one. Everyone touched by the light began to see the things they had tried to hide, their greed, their fears, and their lost innocence.
The light of the necklace didn't just show the crowd's sins. It showed Elara's missing pieces. A vision projected into the air for everyone to see. She saw herself as a toddler, playing in a garden of light. She saw her mother, a woman of the unseen, kissing her forehead before being taken by royal hunters. She saw the king himself, younger then, standing over her father with a sword. He had erased the village's memory of the keepers using a dark ritual, turning a land of magic into a land of fear. The vision shifted to the stepmother, showing the moment she took the baby Elara. She saw the woman weeping as she placed a spell of ordinariness on the child, hoping to hide her light. The crowd gasped as they realized the broken necklace was actually the child's own severed connection to her mother. The stepmother fell to her knees, sobbing openly. I'm sorry, Elara. I thought I could protect you by making you forget who you were. I broke your heart to save your life. The king trembled on his throne, his secrets exposed to every peasant and noble in the land.
The kingdom was no longer a single unit. The soldiers lowered their spears, looking at each other in confusion. Some nobles fled the courtyard, while others fell to their knees in prayer. The people of Oru began to chant Elara's name. Lord Vane, desperate to maintain control, grabbed a sword and ran toward Elara. I will kill the prophecy myself, he screamed. But as he lunged, the invisible door began to manifest in the middle of the courtyard. It was no longer a small shimmering portal. It was a massive archway of white fire. The ground shook, and buildings began to crack. The two worlds were colliding, and the pressure was too much for the physical realm to bear. The sky turned a swirling mix of gold and indigo. The door is breaking, Master Oren cried from the archives. The girl must heal the stone or we are all lost. The rival nobles tried to push through the crowd to claim the necklace, thinking they could control the portal. It was chaos. The line between reality and legend had vanished, and the weight of 100 years of lies was finally crushing the kingdom.
Lord Vane's sword struck the silver casing of the necklace. A terrible sound, like the screaming of 1,000 ghosts, filled the air. The cracked stone shattered into a dozen pieces, falling into the dust at Elara's feet. For a moment, the light died. The doorway flickered and began to shrink, turning a sickly, dark gray. The king laughed, a hollow, desperate sound. It is gone. The power is broken. Elara looked down at the fragments of her life. She felt empty, as if her soul had been pulled out of her chest. But as she stared at the pieces, she saw something inside the dust. Amidst the shards of the broken stone was a small, glowing seed of pure white crystal. It had been hidden inside the brokenness all along. The outer shell had been a cocoon of protection. She realized then that the necklace hadn't been broken by her stepmother. It had been waiting to be hatched. She reached down and picked up the glowing core. As her fingers touched the crystal, a surge of warmth unlike anything she had ever felt raced through her. It wasn't the heat of a fire, but the warmth of a mother's hug. The true power didn't need a casing. It needed a heart.
The mysterious stranger, the guide, appeared beside Elara once more, visible now to everyone in the courtyard. I am the memory of the first keeper, he announced, his voice silencing the wind. For decades, I have waited in the unseen for a soul that could endure the breaking without turning to stone. He looked at the king. You hid the truth to keep your gold, but you forgot that the land belongs to the light. He turned to Elara. The seed in your hand is the heart of the world. It was hidden in your stepmother's house, in your servant's rags, and in your tears. Someone close to you, your own father, orchestrated this path. He knew that only through suffering would you learn the mercy required to lead. Elara looked at the crystal. She understood now. Her life hadn't been a series of accidents. It was a forge. The stepmother's cruelty, the king's greed, and the village's mockery had all been the hammer and anvil. She stood up, her rags transforming into a gown of woven moonlight. She was no longer Elara the servant. She was the guardian of the threshold. The truth was finally in her hands, and the past was ready to be settled. The stepmother crawled forward, her face wet with tears. Kill me, Elara, she whispered. I deserve it for how I treated you. I was a coward. I hid you in filth to keep myself safe from the king. Elara looked at the woman who had spent years mocking her. She saw the fear that had lived behind the sharp words. She saw the woman who had stayed awake at night, listening for royal horses, while Elara slept. The cruelty had been a mask, a desperate attempt to stay invisible. You didn't protect me out of hatred, Elara said, her voice soft as silk. You protected me out of a love that was too afraid to speak its name. She reached out and touched the stepmother's forehead. The woman's eyes widened, and a sense of peace finally filled her face. The necklace hadn't been broken. It had been a shield for both of them. The stepmother's confession broke the last of the king's hold over the people. The guards dropped their weapons completely. The moral weight of the truth was heavier than any iron chain. Elara realized that forgiveness was the final key. With a steady hand, she turned toward the massive, flickering archway of the unseen door. The glowing crystal in Elara's hand began to expand, spinning in the air. As it touched the gray, flickering archway, the doorway stabilized into a bridge of pure, solid light. Elara stood at the origin of the kingdom's power. She saw the source, a great tree of light that fed the rivers and the crops of the world. She realized that the royal palace had been built like a dam, stealing the energy of the unseen world to enrich the king while the common people struggled. The kingdom's survival didn't depend on gold or spears. It depended on the flow of this light. If the door remained closed, the land would eventually wither and die. If it was opened by a greedy hand, the world would be consumed. You are the blood of the guardian, the guide whispered. The bridge is yours to command. You can seal the door and live as a mortal, or you can open it and become the balance. Elara looked back at the village of Oru, at the palace, and at the thousands of expectant faces. The destiny she held was larger than any crown. The kingdom was a garden, and she was the one who held the water. I choose the people, Elara declared. She did not take the crystal to build herself a new palace. Instead, she knelt and pressed the glowing seed into the cracks of the courtyard's stone floor. I will not claim this power for myself. I give it back to the land. A massive shockwave of green and gold light erupted from the ground. The obsidian throne shattered into dust. The palace walls began to grow with vines and flowers, turning the cold fortress into a living temple. The invisible door didn't just stay open. It began to merge with reality. The sky above the kingdom transformed, allowing the two moons of the unseen to shine alongside the sun of the world. Elara stood at the center of the light, her face radiant. She had chosen compassion over domination, and in doing so, she had transformed the necklace from a broken mock gift into a crown of wisdom. The kingdom watched in awe as the world changed. The drought ended, the sick rose from their beds, and the weight of fear lifted from every heart. True power was not in the stone. It was in the hands that refused to clinch it. The invisible door now remains open for all whose hearts are pure. The village of Oru and the royal court are now one, a place where magic and everyday life walk hand in hand. The king was removed, sent to live as a simple farmer to learn the value of the earth he once disdained. Lord Vane vanished into the shadows, his greed his only companion. The stepmother became the keeper of the great archive, spending her days telling the true story of the guardian's return. As for Elara, she stayed in the village, refusing a throne. She is recognized not by a crown, but by the light in her eyes and the wisdom of her judgments. My children, the fire is low, but remember this. Your worth is not determined by what others give you, but by how you carry what is broken. A broken necklace can open a door to a kingdom, if it is carried with courage and mercy. Look around you. There are doors hidden in every act of kindness and every moment of forgiveness. What door are you waiting to open? The key is already in your hand. Go now and sleep well, for the guardian is watching over us all.